Alexandria, welcome to the Empowered Nutrition Podcast. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thanks for coming on. I'm obsessed with this topic and we have so many potential directions to go, but let's just kick it off. And I'd like to ask you a little bit about so you're a CNS, you've got the world is your oyster, you're a functional nutritionist. There's 1,000 different niches and specialties within that space. So I'm curious, how did you get into prenatal and fertility nutrition?
Mm. Yeah, so it was unexpected. I did not really anticipate this when I did my initial degree and training. So I
Yeah.
ended up working as a nutritionist, and I ended up having clients. I was working across a couple different practices, and I ended up having a bunch of clients that were struggling to conceive,
Mm.
and also friends who were coming to me and grabbing me in discrete settings to say, like, hey, I'm struggling, do you have any suggestions? Like, I know you're really interested in health and wellness, like, do you have any suggestions for me? And clients were also coming to me asking the same questions, almost as like a last resort. Like, I've done all the things, I've been struggling to conceive for several years, do you have anything else to offer me? And at the time, I was just really struck by this because it seemed like an important problem and a solvable problem, right? I was doing my functional medicine training at the time. And so I was really inspired to go deep. And so I started looking at a lot of the clinical literature for all of the things that could potentially interfere with getting pregnant. And I designed a series of broad tests to start screening tests, essentially, to start flagging potential issues with my clients. And what do you know? All of a sudden, the test came back with a whole bunch of stuff flagged that their providers had never even looked at.
Mm.
Oftentimes, after, again, as I said, years of struggling to conceive. And once we were able to address these issues, largely through diet and lifestyle and supplementation, sometimes medications and procedures in collaboration with their doctor, they got pregnant, either naturally or on the next round of assisted reproductive cycles. And I was struck by this. The outcomes were staggering, and nobody else was looking at this and nobody else was doing this. And so it really occurred to me, why are we waiting until someone is struggling to conceive and they've undergone a lot of financial hardship, emotional hardship, physical hardship, to screen for very basic things that we could have screened for day one when they decided they wanted to build their family? And so I was really inspired by this, started diving into preconception guidelines, realized we've had them for 40 years, but nobody knows about them. And so, I just felt like there was a new opportunity to rewrite this dialogue around getting pregnant and to prepare for pregnancy like we prepare for any other major milestone, even a wedding, like a year in advance with guidance, tools, and support.
That's such a great analogy. I mean, if you feel like you should take a year to plan your wedding, how about a baby?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is the big cliffhanger in what you said of what are the themes of these things that you were finding on these tests that were a problem? Was it hormones? Was it nutritional deficiencies? Was it toxins? Like, what are we talking about here?
All of the above. Right. So, I mean, I think the big aha that I had was that fertility is an extension of our overall health. It is not just a below the waist conversation. It is not just about your reproductive organs, and it is not just about your hormones. It does involve those things, but it is not only about those things. And if we only look at hormones, which is what most fertility tests on the market do, we're missing like 70% of the data to find out what's going on, right? And so if we take that premise, then we look at 5 different categories at the company that I founded. So we look at blood status, hormone status, metabolic status, nutrient status, and immune status. And these are all the things that are well validated in the clinical literature. And then certainly by my experience since then, that can cause challenges, A, getting pregnant, and B, with the health of that pregnancy and baby.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take a wider lens, we're able to identify sometimes yellow flags, sometimes red flags with ability to conceive or the health of a future pregnancy and baby.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, I agree with you on the sex hormone focus, it's so downstream. So yeah, it's valid that
Mm.
if sex hormones are imbalanced, that's probably contributing, but there are that's the end result of upstream problems that are related to the things you talked about of like what about adrenal hormones, what about nutritional deficiencies, what about environmental exposures, what about like you said immune, I assume you're looking at things like autoimmune antibodies and things like that, overall systemic inflammation. I think those are the more upstream things that then dysregulate the sex hormones down the line. So it's
Such
just a mistake to only look at that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna amplify what you were saying because I think it's such an important point for everyone listening that yes, even if we get information that your sex hormones are dysregulated, as you said, we have no idea why.
Right.
And right, sex hormones are downstream to thyroid function and downstream to adrenal function. And so without a picture of what's going on with your thyroid or your adrenals or even what you said, nutrient deficiencies, we have no idea how to intervene. But once
Mhm,
we have that broader set of information, then we can say, oh, well, this is the constellation of factors that we think is depressing or
mhm,
elevating your hormone levels. And therefore, you can be much more precise in your interventions.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that, and another thing I like that you kind of alluded to is that just because you use functional nutrition to prepare for pregnancy and to potentially help with infertility doesn't mean that it's anti-procedure. A lot of women, even with the help of procedures, still struggle to get pregnant. Um, but so it's not that you will never need it or that you shouldn't ever get it if you need it, but you're going to be more successful with your fertility overall. And if you still need a procedure, you're more likely to be successful with that. And you didn't even say this. I don't know if you would agree, but from the research I've seen, there's a lot of nutrients that impact fetal development in a way that, like, sure, maybe you would have gotten her pregnant either way, but with your overall health and your nutritional status improved at even before you get pregnant, you're going to potentially impact the long-term health of the baby as well.
Absolutely. Preconception health is incredibly important for that reason. So I think it's two factors. One is the increased probability of getting pregnant in the first place, and then the second is increasing the probability of having a healthy child, and it's for the reason that
Yeah.
you're mentioning, right? Because if we have nutrient deficiencies going into pregnancy, that is likely to affect fetal development. If we have immune system dysregulation, that could potentially increase miscarriage risk, as an example, right? If we have inflammation, again, right, that can affect the baby's health as well. So I
Mhm.
think when we think about fertility, we think about it as this binary thing, right? Did you get pregnant or did you not get pregnant,
Right.
right? But we miss the larger picture. Most people don't really care about getting pregnant. They care about getting pregnant with a healthy baby. And that's why I love this preconception period because it is so profound for that is you're improving your health and your reproductive partner's health in service of not only getting pregnant but increasing the probability of health for your future child and even generations to come, which I know you've
Yeah.
recently been chatting about. So I think it's such an incredible time period to have that level of influence.
That's one of the main reasons why I think we need to talk more about like epigenetics because I think it's really lost. Most people don't realize that the your environment and that you're in, the food you eat, the exposures you get, the stress you have really does alter the genetic expression of not only your genes but of your offspring's genes. And that so it's not that your genes change, but the switchboard of your genes of how they're turned on and off is heritable to some degree. And people I think have no idea of that.
Mm. I love this example that you give of the switchboard. I heard you talk about it before, and I think it's a brilliant analogy because it's not just one switch, it's many switches. And
Yeah.
we can have switches turned on or turned off. And essentially, you want switches turned on for healthy expression and you want switches turned off for unhealthy expression, right? I mean, at a very basic level. And
Yeah.
what I don't think is well understood is that this preconception period is actually what sets the stage epigenetically through egg and sperm. And
Mhm.
so, right, we as, the female reproductive partner also has epigenetic impacts in the prenatal period. But the earliest epigenetic impacts actually happen at the point of conception, right? So what you are doing in the 3, 6, 12 months prior to
Mhm.
conception, same thing for your reproductive partner, that actually sets the stage for the epigenetic material that is then passed on to your child. And that
Mhm.
sets the lifelong trajectory of health. And so when we think about the concept of generational health, that's what this is. And this idea of legacy and giving our children a legacy of health. So, what we're doing in this time period is so, so important. And we used to think, okay, well, actually, it was like, the first 1,000 days of life, like that's the most, important. And then we said, okay, well, actually, that's true. But the prenatal period is also really important. And
Yeah.
now we're moving even earlier and saying, no, actually, the preconception period is really important as we think about developmental origins of disease.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I know there's no like black and white line of like, okay, the preconception period starts 12 months before you conceive and nothing matters before that and everything matters after. So there's no clean line. But it sounds like you're saying that generally about a year in advance is when people should really start to get into some type of true preparation for conceiving.
That's usually what I recommend because it feels like a doable time frame for people. And if we think about the egg development cycles and sperm development cycles, it aligns with that. So egg maturation is actually about a year, but the
Mhm.
last stage is roughly 3 to 4 months, and sperm development is about 3 months. So, depending on your starting point, you may actually want several of these egg maturation and sperm development cycles to get to the optimal state in which you say, yes, I'm in the state of health that I would want to pass on to my future child, right? And so for
Yes.
some people, that time frame might be slightly longer, especially if you're dealing with a chronic health condition. Some people may have a slightly shorter time frame if you've already been taking compensatory action in service of your broader health, but I wouldn't cut it too short, right? Because again, we want to get to an optimal time period and it can take time for us to upgrade our nutrition and
Yeah.
for our nutrient stores to be reflected and for, changes in our cell structures to be updated and so forth.
Right. You want to be healthy for, say, you're like, generally, I want to be healthy for 3 months before I conceive. It takes months to get healthy, as a broad term, in terms of catch up of repleting nutrient deficiencies or improving gut health to lower systemic inflammation or whatever the thing is. It's not like you just fix it overnight. There's months of getting to the point where you start that 3-month clock of being healthy for 3 months. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, wh-
And
what are, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, and if you give yourself the grace of time, it reduces a lot of the pressure around conception. Like, conception can be pressure filled if we're on tight timelines and we're like, we have to meet this timeline and we have to do it quickly. But there's something less pressure inducing about preparing than trying. So the more time you can spend in the preparing window, usually the less time you can spend in the trying window. It doesn't always work that way, but generally speaking.
Sure.
So we can, reduce the temperature in the room in terms of pressure if we give ourselves a little bit more grace around setting expectations for the preparation time period to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you say, "Oh, I don't want to spend a year preparing. I just want to try now." It could take you a year to get pregnant. Whereas if you just prepare for a year, you might get pregnant quickly. So, yeah.
Mhm.
I know you could probably write a whole book on this, so we can't go into full depth on it, but maybe you can give me some high points of like specific things that like, what is this 12 months? Like, what are we talking about doing here? What do you generally recommend that people do in this 12-month period?
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, I do talk about a checklist in the book, which is kind of like the general things that I would think about as you're contemplating getting ready to conceive. So I can go through those at a high level, and then if people are interested, they can always read more. But I
Mhm.
think about it as two big categories. You have like the micro and then the macro. So on the micro, it would be understanding your personal health baseline. And as someone who's trained as a functional nutritionist and runs a preconception testing company, I'm biased on this topic, but I really do
Mhm.
believe in getting your baseline testing because right now, what's happening in a lot of medicine, but particularly in fertility is all 30-year-olds are created equal, all 40-year-olds are created equal. And that's just a blunt instrument, and it's inefficient at best and ineffective at worst. And I know you just had a conversation about the difference between chronological age and biological age. So, I think that plays in here really importantly.
Yeah.
So rather than following a protocol for an average 30-year-old is much more helpful to understand what's going on in your unique body with your unique physiology, and you can be much more targeted if you understand that. And so, we're looking at 70 biomarkers, which is 10 times what a traditional fertility test is looking at. So there's just so much more information to understand what's going on. So I think getting a baseline through testing is one great starting point, and then having a preconception visit with your doctor. And many people listening might be like, wait a minute, what's a preconception visit? There is such a thing as that? Yes, there is actually. And what that preconception visit is designed to do is to understand the current state of your health and whether or not there are any risk factors or any modifications that would need to be made to make sure that you are, for example, not taking any medications that aren't fertility safe, or even, that any medications that aren't pregnancy safe, that you don't have any family health history to be aware of. And any chronic conditions that you have are well managed. These are all components of a preconception visit that are really important. And oftentimes you really do have to advocate for yourself. A lot of providers don't do preconception visits or don't have the time to properly do them. So, that's a big one that I would encourage people to think about as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the medication and supplement thing is huge. I mean, I had one yesterday where my client shared that she had become pregnant, and it was like, okay, well, we have to completely look at every supplement that you're on, and there's several that we need to take you off of, but people don't even always think about that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
What about specific things about like food and diet, nutrition? Do you say, okay, now just start eating a clean, healthy diet, or do you have more like specific targeted things that you say everybody should do, or is it more that everybody should just individualize their diet based off of their lab results?
Well, I would say both, right? I think this is the macro category. So I think there's a series of fertility blockers in our environment. And the way I talk about this to people is that our bodies were designed to conceive, but our modern environment was not, right? And so it's our job to remove the things that are naturally dampening our fertility so that we can restore our bodies to a state that is receptive to conception. And nutrition is a huge one where I see people not getting the optimal nutrition that is necessary for reproduction. So the couple of things I would say on nutrition, because this could be a whole masterclass, and I know you've done a whole bunch on this as well, but I would just start with the principle that generally speaking, we're eating more food-like substances and less food. And because of that, right, our bodies are getting oftentimes calorie-dense food, but not nutrient-dense food. And when our bodies don't get appropriate nutrients, they think that they are starving. And if your body thinks it's starving, it will downregulate reproductive function because it thinks it's in a famine, right? And if you're in a famine, that's probably not an appropriate time to conceive. And so adaptively, your body does this as a protection mechanism. It thinks it is protecting you and a potential future child. That being said, we're seeing this more and more and more. The vast majority of reproductive age women are micronutrient deficient. This is true in a lot of the surveys that have been done nationally, and it's being confirmed certainly in the data that we're seeing. Over 80% of the time, we're seeing people flagged for basic nutrient deficiencies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not even controversial, like you said. Even NHANES is like, massive insufficiencies. So yeah.
So the couple of things I would say here are, generally speaking, when I think about guiding people to a fertility-friendly diet, it's generally not a trendy diet. It is often a moderate to higher fat diet, in particular because your hormones are made from cholesterol, right? So people don't really understand that, and so that's really important to understand. A moderate protein and moderate carbohydrate. Generally speaking, that is a model that works well for most people. Are there exceptions? Sure. Where some people might need to manage their blood sugar more closely, and so forth. However, generally speaking, that's what I see. And if we start doing a lot more restrictive dieting, then that can exacerbate nutrient deficiencies, and it can trigger our body again to think that we are in a starvation mode and can downregulate reproductive function.
Yeah, love that. And because with fat rides a lot of the nutrients that women are deficient in. So choline, for example, is going to come from eggs, and so if you help them get past their fear of fat and cholesterol and get them eating more eggs, now you're getting more choline. Omega-3 fats are critical for fetal development. I don't even know why I test almost everybody I work with. I don't know why I keep doing it because everybody's low. Well, it's mostly for their own like buy-in.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like
Mhm.
um, so that they don't feel like they have to wonder if I'm like crazy or not. I'm like, yep, you were low. Even though you eat salmon once a month, turns out I was right. That's not enough. So high fat fish is another like high fat food, or vitamin D. I mean, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I mean, it's an extremely high percentage of the US population is too low on vitamin D. Guess what? That's a fat soluble vitamin that's going to come from
Yep.
high fat foods that women are terrified of, like dairy. um, like terrifying. Vitamin A, so critical for fetal development, is another
Mhm.
fat soluble vitamin that you cannot get from plants. You can only get from animal sources that are going to ride with fat. So I'm with you on that. And I think we've come a long way from like the low fat diet era of the 1980s, but I think there's still a lot of sort of like stigma around high fat foods, especially the animal based ones, but they're actually the most important foods, in my opinion, in a prenatal diet, like liver, for example. Not that everybody has to eat liver or you won't have a healthy baby, but it's sure a good idea if you want to have a baby. And guess what? It's an animal food. So I think there's still some stigma to work through that's even more recent from sort of like the plant based movement has like kind of underscored that. It's like, okay, we're not afraid of fat anymore. We're just afraid of any animal food. And to me, that's a mistake when it comes to prenatal nutrition. But I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point, which is plant-based has come to mean vegan or vegetarian. And I don't
Right.
know that anyone who's studied nutrition would argue with a plant-based diet, meaning a diet that has
Right.
a lot of plants in it. However,
Yep.
um, I also don't think that if you actually look at fertility numbers, like the data very clearly shows that people who are on vegan or vegetarian diets have lower hormone levels than their meat eating counterparts. Period. End of sentence. The data is not unclear about this. Now,
Yeah.
what I would say is there's lots of reasons why people adopt vegan and vegetarian diets. And so if people are happy with their health, if they're happy with their fertility, so am I. If they're not, then I would say maybe
Yeah.
there might be an opportunity to reevaluate introducing some, maybe not even all, animal products for this phase of life because they can be very, very supportive of fertility. And liver, as you mentioned, is an incredible one. Not only does it have a ton, it has tons and tons of nutrients in it, and you can sneak it in a lot of more subtle ways
Yeah.
than people realize, and you can take it as a supplement as well. But I've had plenty of people who take it and they're just shocked with how great they feel on it. So everyone gets to decide their
Mhm.
own choices around what they are and are not going
Yeah.
to introduce into their bodies. But I do think it's helpful to just understand what the data is suggesting and why, as you're talking about, right? Why a diet that excludes animal products can be problematic, the certain nutrient deficiencies, the digestion and elimination implications, so that people can decide for themselves what makes sense.
Right. And it doesn't mean there's not ethical things that it's valid if someone has religious or ethical like feelings that make them feel like they need to choose a vegan or a vegetarian diet. But what's a mistake is to believe that that's optimal for pregnancy and prenatal nutrition, in my opinion, and breastfeeding even. But if it's that person says, "Yeah, I'm gonna get data, I'm gonna get tested, I'm gonna supplement to fill in gaps," then that's certainly a viable route that can be effective, but unfortunately, I just see a lot of cases where people aren't doing that. They're kind of been convinced by maybe some kind of YouTube algorithm or Instagram reel algorithm that this is like the ideal human diet, and they're not doing what you're talking about, which is like getting data, supplementing around deficiencies and optimizing their nutritional status, like based off of their individualized lab results. Yeah.
Mm. I like the way that you explain that because I think that's an important distinction, right? And I see the same thing with weight, right? Where a lot of times we use weight as a proxy for health. And look, it can be a proxy for health, but it is
Yeah.
one data point. And so what I find even more helpful is to run testing to say, okay, is weight impacting you in the way that we
Yeah.
think it might be impacting you, right? And we can look at the things that fat tissue, which is not inert tissue, it's metabolically active tissue, is likely to impact, which is inflammation levels, insulin levels, right? Certainly broader blood sugar dysregulation, hormone levels, right? And you can see all of these other markers and you can understand, oh, okay, this is how my body is processing this body fat. And I can decide whether or not I would like to change these things or not, rather than just a blanket statement about weight. And so, I think it's the same thing with
Right.
diet. The more reductionist we are, the harder it is for people to understand the implications and be able to action anything coming out of it. It just feels very dismissive. And so I think that data can be really helpful in giving people the underlying physiology so that they have agency over the process themselves.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about your company and how you help people solve that problem. Because I think a lot of times they have tried to get data, and if they have fertility challenges, like you said, they've gone to doctors, gotten labs. They've been told there's nothing else to see here. So tell me how you kind of
Mm.
help that person in terms of what you offer.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say there's like two big buckets of people that come to us. There's the first bucket of people who are planning to conceive, and they just want to understand what their starting point is, so that they know
Mhm.
if there are areas to optimize, and they can be more directed in their efforts. And then I think the second bucket is folks who are struggling to conceive and they've been, as you said, kind of dismissed by the traditional medical model, and they're still not getting the answers that they want, and they want to find out if there's anything that they can be doing to increase their chances on their own. And so, for those folks, what I generally find is unexplained infertility is usually not yet explained infertility. And if we
Yeah.
go wide enough, right, or deep enough, we can usually find at least one thread, if not multiple, to pull on. Does this mean that it's a panacea and that we always know and it's a perfect picture? No. But the vast majority of the time, we can find dysregulations that could be responsible for the challenges. And even if you address those, right, the worst thing that can happen is you're healthier, and the probability of your child being healthier is even higher, to what you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
So, modulating your health around trying to conceive has just such a series of knock-on effects. It's, kind of a win-win all around. And
Mhm.
the other thing I will mention is like, the other kind of buckets of people that we see besides these two main ones are folks that have experienced miscarriage are also coming to us to say, hey, like, my doctor will not do any testing to see if there might have been something that contributed to this. And sometimes we don't know. But people are wanting more information to understand if there might be things that they could change to optimize their chances of getting pregnant the next time that they try. So that's another area that we're seeing as well.
Okay. And so it sounds like for either of these, any of these categories of people, they all get the same panel, or are there different panels?
We're using the same screening panel. So the
Okay.
idea is that the factors that would affect natural fertility are also the factors that
Yeah.
are going to affect assisted, fertility. And so these are all the things in the literature that we've seen that can affect ability to get pregnant and the health of that pregnancy. And it's meant to be a screening test. So again, this doesn't mean we look at every single factor under the sun that could possibly interfere
Right.
with fertility. However, it's the broadest pre-pregnancy wellness test on the market. And so we look at more factors than anyone else. And it's the most common factors. And then oftentimes, right, if we see something flagged, like you were mentioning autoimmune conditions. So one of the things that we will run is anti-nuclear antibody, which is a screening test for autoimmune conditions. It is not diagnostic in and of itself, but it could be suggestive of potential autoimmune processes going on in the body. And so if that flags, a natural next step would be to do a follow-up testing with your doctor to understand if that is at play, right? So depending on the results that come back, there's, different sets of actions. Sometimes it's dietary interventions, sometimes it's lifestyle interventions, sometimes it's supplementation, sometimes it's collaboration with your provider.
Got it. Okay. So if somebody gets the panel, it sounds like it's not like they would work with you all as the practitioner. They would then work with their current practitioners or try to find another practitioner that can help them with whatever the findings are on the test.
So they'll have a call with one of our pre-pregnancy educators to review the results and contextualize
Mhm.
them and start to come up with a game plan. And then after
Mhm.
that, they can decide, where they want to take it and, the constellation of providers that they want to put together to figure out the best plan for them.
That's amazing. And where do people have to live in a certain area to get the test?
No, it's offered across the US.
Okay. So they get the kit and then they go find a place to get is it a blood draw?
It is a blood draw, yes, because we're testing a lot of
Mm.
biomarkers. So it's a blood draw. Mhm.
Okay. So like, we do a ton of these kinds of specialty tests. You just find a phlebotomy place where you can get it in your local area and then you mail it back.
Well, the lab takes care of all. There's no kits, there's no mailing, there's no logistics on the part of
Oh,
the customer. So you would either go into a local lab, you would have your labs drawn, or you would have a mobile lab tech come to you, do the draw, and then from there the lab will take care of everything. Then you will receive the results through our app, and it will tell you kind of here's what's flagged, here's the implications. You have a call with one of our pre-pregnancy experts, and then you can decide where you want to take things from there. But the idea is really just to give you more information than you would otherwise have. A lot of times, as you've said, right, people are being dismissed or they're being told not to worry about it,
mhm,
and they are worried about it. And so this is a KPI or key performance indicator for your fertility before you even
mhm.
start trying. Because right now the only KPI for fertility is I tried and it either worked or it didn't work.
Yeah.
But we can use
Yeah.
right other KPIs, which is our health, as an indicator of probability of success.
So interesting the data that you have access to then with all of the results that you have. I'm curious, like, let's say if this is an unfair question, just tell me no, but in the United States, we're having a decrease in fertility rates. We're having a we're having increase in fertility, decrease amount of babies born every year per capita, like per woman. If you could just stand up on a big box and talk to like everybody in America who's wanting to have a baby, like based off the themes of things that you're seeing across the results of your test, what are the things that you just like wish you could tell everybody, like start doing this or like stop doing that? Like what are the main things that you just keep seeing over and over again that are common?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that I would say actually is please do not let anyone convince you that age is the only predictor of fertility. I think we
Yeah.
have a generation of women who have been scared and have been told the only thing that they could have done is have gotten pregnant younger. Too bad, so sad
Mm.
for them. And once they turned, I don't know, 35, they turned into a pumpkin. Too bad, so sad. Right. Yeah, and it's devastating. It's devastating, it's
Yeah.
dismissive, and it's also not data driven. So,
Right.
if you've been told that and if you're feeling that there's nothing that you can do, I just want you to know there's a message of hope. There are so many things that you can do to optimize your health and therefore your fertility. And we can't change our chronological age, our age in years, but we can modify our biological age, which is the vitality of our cells. So I
Mhm.
think that's the first most important thing to understand
Mhm.
about fertility. And then,
Mhm.
the second thing that I would say is the older you are, the more your health matters.
Yeah.
Age or youth, I should say, forgives a lot of ills. And so, we can get away with more things when we're younger. And so the older
Yeah.
we are in years, the more we have to take compensatory action to offset the effects of things. Right. So I think that's another thing. And then I think the last thing that I would just say is that this is not just on your shoulders. Biology does not care about our cultural construct that fertility is a female problem. It is literally a 50-50 biological equation. So
Oh, yeah.
involving your reproductive partner is incredibly important to optimize the full equation. If we only look at 50% of an equation, we're missing huge pieces of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, sperm counts are in a free fall for everybody that doesn't already know this. It
Mhm.
is wild. So tell me about this. You probably would you recommend then that both partners get the test?
Yes, I do. Most of the time, people are testing as couples. And so,
Okay.
regardless of what your relationship construct looks like as well, right, this still applies. And so, in some cases, you may not have access to, for example, the male reproductive partner. And so, you get to modify this for your unique circumstance. But I just think it's important for people to understand that if you are in a relationship with a male reproductive partner, their contribution is just as important as yours. And so any changes that you are making, I would also encourage them to be making. And, as you said, yeah, sperm counts have dropped 60% in the last 40 years. 60%. It is a staggering
Wow.
number. Yeah. And
Yeah.
testosterone has also dropped quite meaningfully.
Mhm.
And that has all sorts of implications, but certainly on fertility. And I these are far-reaching effects. So the more that we can be aware of what's going on and try to take action without stressing ourselves out completely about it and feeling totally overwhelmed, because it's a fine line between those two things. I think the better off we will be.
Absolutely. Would you say that there's typically, and that's probably unfair because I'll bet it's usually that there's some things to work on for each partner, but would you say that it's slanted one way or the other, that it tends to be that there's more that needs to be done for the male partner or the female partner, or is it just not really a trend in either direction?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, so the larger infertility data sets suggest one third female factor, one third male factor, one third combined factor.
Mm,
And
mm,
I'm looking at our data sets to see whether that bears out as well. But I would guess that it's probably in line with that. I mean, we one thing I didn't mention, and you had asked about this, is themes that we're seeing. So the themes that we see on testing, generally speaking, are elevated inflammation. I mean, certainly over half the time we're seeing elevated inflammatory markers flagged by the lab. We're not even talking about optimal ranges. We're
yeah.
seeing
Wow.
nutrient deficiencies 80% of the time. And again, this is lab flagged nutrient deficiencies. This is not optimal ranges.
Hmm.
We're seeing blood sugar dysregulation a decent amount of the time. Actually, not as much as I would have anticipated. But we certainly are seeing it, and we're looking at fasting insulin, so a much earlier indicator of blood sugar dysregulation.
Yeah.
Um, we see a decent amount of hormonal imbalances. So at least half of people have at least one, if not several, hormonal imbalances. So that could include sex hormones, it could include thyroid function, it could include adrenal dysregulation with cortisol. And so, all of these things are contributing to challenges. And then we actually are seeing a pretty decent amount of the time females flagging for some sort of autoimmune process. And
Hmm.
so we're taking a look at that to see kind of what the follow up testing looks on that. So the data is a little bit too early to say, but we see that autoimmune conditions are on the rise and they're disproportionately present in the female population. So, our data is certainly bearing that out.
Yeah. Oh, so fascinating. It seems like the challenge for you after I'm sure it's extreme, everything's challenging, growing a company, making a custom test panel, but then the other challenge would be, okay, all learning these things is only the initial part. That's usually the easier part. Then what do you do about it? Like, how do you find that sweet spot between like not overwhelming them, not making them feel like they have nowhere to go. Like, I learned all this stuff, but I don't know where to get help. But then on the other hand, you can't work one on one with everybody all over the country. It seems like that would be tricky to solve. And like you set them up with some information in the app, and then you hope that they find a practitioner, I suppose, that can help them with these more complex problems.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on building out our solutions more as we're getting more requests from clients to
Yeah.
continue on the journey with them. And now we've been around long enough that we're starting to see clients getting pregnant, and so they're looking for support
Hey.
as they move through these different stages. Yeah, it's such a cool thing when your job involves that part of the journey. So
Yeah.
yes, I think we're trying to figure out the best way to support people through these different stages. However, what I would say is I've been incredibly impressed with the level of ownership that people have, especially over this time period. I think, when I was working as a
Yeah.
nutritionist in general, a lot of times I found that people would struggle to have leverage over themselves, especially if there wasn't something imminent for which they're making these changes. And, a lot of times we get adapted to living in discomfort or, living with these challenges. But when people want to build their families, they're highly, highly motivated and
Yes.
oftentimes will do for their children things that they won't do for themselves. And so, it's a really interesting time period in which to work because people get these results and they're just very motivated to take action and figure out what it is that's going to make a difference to build their future family. So I'm just consistently inspired by our clients and how much ownership they take over this process.
I agree with you. That's definitely what I've seen, and their readiness to change is high. They are very committed to this goal of having a healthy baby, and they're much more willing to do put a lot more effort into their lifestyle and their diet than the average maybe person who doesn't have that goal. I find that to be very true. It's interesting because you could have maybe a middle-aged person that's facing they're pre-diabetic, right on the toes edge of diabetes, and that to them is actually a certainly more threatening thing to their own wellness than whether or not you have a baby, like, in a sense. But I think that as humans, if you're wanting to have a baby, it's almost like a hard wiring where it just feels so critical and so important and um, so high value that it's kind of interesting what that says about like like humans. I think that
Mhm.
will do more. I think a couple that wants to have a baby will do more to have that healthy baby than that person that's facing diabetes. In my experience, there's going to be exceptions, but I disagree with what you're saying. I've seen it, and I've been there personally. It's like you really want to have that baby.
Absolutely. It's really cool to
It's
see.
amazing that yes, it's amazing that you're helping people to do this and that helping people to solve this frustrating problem. Maybe you can share a little bit more about Poplin and how people can learn about it and where they should go.
Yeah, absolutely. So Poplin does pre-pregnancy wellness testing, which is what we've been talking about. So if you're interested
Mhm.
in pre-pregnancy wellness tested, or even something that I shared and you have questions about, feel free to reach out. You can go to getpoplin, GETPOPLIN.com. And, we'd love to support you wherever you are on your preconception journey. And one thing I didn't mention, but I think this is important, preconception is relevant whether this is a first pregnancy or a fifth pregnancy. It's relevant whether you're 23 or
Yeah.
43. It's about, you know, before and between pregnancies and optimizing those periods. So even if you've had previous pregnancies, it can sometimes be really helpful to ensure that your hormones are regulated again and that your nutrient deficiencies potentially from a previous pregnancy have been addressed as you prepare for a subsequent pregnancy.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I've seen that quite a lot, that someone will have a baby, everything's fine, and then they'll have another baby in quick succession, and then they'll struggle quite a lot with maybe postpartum depression,
Mhm.
with anxiety is another thing I'll see quite a lot, or with breastfeeding, or new health challenge will pop up. I think it's not well understood that how much a pregnancy and a breastfeeding period can deplete women, and so it's just really, like you said, it's not just because you've had one or two babies doesn't mean that you shouldn't thoroughly prepare, and in fact, it maybe means that it's even more important to thoroughly prepare for another baby because you're not in the same place you were before you had those first babies. I agree with you on that.
Mhm. Well said.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so I'm excited for people to check out Poplin, and it sounds like you guys have a promo that you can share. So, is it okay if I tell everybody about that?
Please do.
Okay, so it's code. If you go to their website, it's code ENP50, and you'll get $50 off of their premium test panels. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes as well, and of course, people can check you out. And I think I saw you have an Instagram as well, which is really cool.
I do. And yeah, please come find me, ask questions, and we can continue the dialogue. And Erin, thank you so much for the opportunity to share and the thoughtful questions and the incredible work that you're doing. It's very aligned to how we think about things as well. And so I think we need more individuals just supporting people, supporting families, and in these really
Yeah,
transformational time periods.
absolutely. I mean, we're an insurance-based practice, and you'll get the list of conditions that insurance thinks that they should be covering a dietitian for, and you'll rarely see prenatal nutrition listed. I think that's just a reflection of the fact that this is not well done by the conventional medical community. Like you said, a practitioner might not even know how to do a preconception visit, or if they did it, they might not know what to say, and there's just very little. Like I don't think I've ever heard a patient say, "Oh yeah, I went to my primary care and they told me I should prepare a year in advance." So
Mhm.
there needs to be more support in this space. So it's a great thing you're doing, and I'm so honored to have the chance to spread the word about you guys.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to be here with you.
Same. All right. Well, everybody check out Poplin, and check out their test. I'm gonna be like a weird lady, like definitely done having babies, but I want to get your panel, so I'm gonna stalk you. And all jokes aside, thanks, Alexandria. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.